program was envisioned by Mr. Paul Barrett and could not have happened without the work, of course, of ArtPlay and AEIVA team members and Joan Inman of ArtPlay. Happy birthday, Joan. This program was inspired by AEIVA's current art exhibit titled Thornton Dial I2 in Alabama. And if you haven't had a chance to see the exhibition, you will absolutely want to do it. It's will be up in the AEIVA gallery until or through December 10th. So I am thrilled and honored to be the guest host for today. Not only are we going to hear from two extraordinary artists, but the program will highlight how physical trauma affects an artist's body of work. So welcome to Jakob Dwight and Richard Thornton. And at this point, I will turn things over to Jakob.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. My name is Jakob Dwight. I am a painter by training and a digital artist, a conceptual artist for I guess the last 20 years. And I've recently made a switch back to painting, and I'm joining you today from Greenville Library in Greenville, Alabama. So just wanted to give a shout out to libraries. Yeah. So can Richard, maybe do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay. I'm Richard Dow, son of Thornton Dow. So I'd just like to thank everyone that's associated with this program, because it really have made the family proud. It's something that we had been looking into for years, and it was grateful to have this opportunity to speak on this matter. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, cool. So my first question is, what are some of the changes, if any, that you noticed with your father's work after his after the stroke, as far as his ways of working, but also, you know, disposition and kind of outlook on life, if he struggled with anything additionally that was, you know, based in that trauma?
No, physical ability, you know, I think it, you know, it affected in several ways, you know. One were his ability to, with the fast reflex, motor skills, as far as drawing, works on paper, that nature. And I think, you know, his motivation and his mental capacity, I didn't see any change in that, because he still had the drive to produce art. You know, art became a part of his life, you know, basically up until the time he passed. He had a little, I think he moved around a little bit slower, just wouldn't, didn't have a whole lot of confidence in, well, he moved around a little bit slower. I put it to that effect, you know, and so me and my brother Dan would try to look for the type of materials and things of that nature that we thought would be comfortable for him to work with. And so that's about where I would go on that.
Yeah. And was it, did he immediately get back to work on his art when he, was there Any kind of delay after this?
I think it was a delay there for, several months, as the
Mm,
originally happened. Um, and, but like I said, it was the artwork was a part of him. It's just like, when you wake up in the morning and
mm,
you open your eyes, and that was probably one of the first things that popped in his head, was the art. I think
mm,
it was a part of him, you know. Uh,
mm,
and that's where his main focus um, were always, the art. And I
mm,
think he just, once you kind of find your spot, uh, then contributing to this world, things, his talent, people appreciated it, and
mm,
so he was real proud of that. And that was something that I think up until the last minute, he was determined to do. And he enjoyed,
mm.
the people that, admired his work. And so he just kind of dedicated his life.
Yeah.
And by the same token, to Jacob, he wasn't the type of person that gave in easily, you know.
Mm, right.
So, right.
Yeah. 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 I always think about, or have recently began to think about the almost a generational approach to adversity, where it seems that with I would say the older generations, as far as baby boomers and Gen X, it's much more of a kind of a fight attitude towards adversity, and kind of it seems like more of a will to push through and not let, like you said with your father, not let things get the best of you, you know. And that's not to say that millennials or Gen Z are give in, but I wonder. I just think about that difference, and um, that seems to be along generational lines, but it's also like individual
Right.
dispositions, I guess.
Right.
Um, and so, in terms of materials and what he was able to work with, or what he was attracted to working with, did you notice any real change as far as the actual materials or studio practice, as far as space? I mean, I saw that he worked a lot on tables, um, but, I just kind of wanted to get more of an idea of the actual spatial, um, his methods of working with space, or, did you notice any changes in materials? Any things that he favored later on after the stroke?
Well, like I mentioned before, me and my brother Dan,
Mm-hmm.
we did, probably the best that we could as far as trying to give him support in that particular area. Um,
Mm-hmm.
with activities, in the studio, we came to the conclusion that even before he had the stroke, that he just needed help. He was getting older, and
Mm-hmm.
his movements, was a little slower than they were, each year. Um,
Okay.
so the physical part, the creation, um, I think he had tremendous help with that part of it. because, all these things happened shortly after my mom passed. And this studio space that we had was probably about maybe a little over 500 square feet. And so as he aged, and on top of that, with the stroke, we knew definitely, that he did need help in that particular area. And so we gave him all the support that we thought he needed. And, he was still, I think, grieving over some with my mom passing and all. So we just kind of nurtured him, like a golden egg. We just tried to give him all the support that we knew how.
Yeah, and do you think what I guess kind of to give the audience a glimpse of kind of a day-to-day, was it like daily help, or was it just when he ran into something that he came up against a wall with something or needed something lifted, or was it more periodic, or was it like a constant, I don't want to say a beck and call, but like, were you studio assistants, I guess, versus help every now and then? What kind of frequency, I guess?
Well, I 2005, after my mom passed, that's when he actually moved the studio up to the shop, which was Dallas Metal Pattern. And I had a discussion, with Mr. Arnett about, whether we should move it up there, and we did. And I think at that particular time is when, I know that me and Dan, we start coming to his rescue as far as like purchasing paint, going, doing, picking up his paint, whatever materials that we thought he needed, moving stuff around, like I said, and in a general way that we could. So I hope I answered your question there.
Yeah, you did. And more of a, I guess, a question about just his general drive and inspirations behind his works. I mean, some of the titles we can definitely see, that they were a response to the Rodney King beatings, or to Obama being inaugurated. But in general, if you had to kind of sum up his inspirations on a daily basis towards his work, what do you think that would be, or those inspirations would be?
Thinking, I'm trying to see. I think he was inspired, by a lot of things that happened in the country, around the world. He wasn't much of a, guy that watched TV that much, but he did pay close attention to the news, and so just world events and things of that nature. A lot of things I think came from his upbringing. So such as, the piece, no matter how ragged the flag was, got to hold us together. I think that piece probably came from just his upbringing, you know. If you look at, you know, the time that the struggles and stuff that he had, just from day to day. If you look at the timeline when he was born, you know, things were, you know, it was a lot different from it is today. So I wouldn't want anyone to think that, you know, he had this beautiful life, you know, because I can remember the struggles and stuff that he had, you know, coming, well, while we was coming up. So I imagine it's a lot harder,
Right.
you know, when he was born. And on top of that, you know, I found out later that he was actually raised by his great grandmother till he was about, you know, 8 years old, and she passed, and his grandmother raised him till he got about 12, and Sarah Lockett raised him till he got grown. So, you know, he had a lot of women in his life. So you're gonna see a lot of women in his drawings. So a lot of it, you know, were just life experiences. And I think, you know, a lot of things that just generally happen in the world, you know, he, you know, put his fingerprint on and say, yeah, I can relate to that. And that's where, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. So Kimberly, just wanted to check in with you and see if you had any questions for Richard or myself.
Yes. So first I wanted to address a couple of the questions that came in on the chat. One person is asking, what year did Thornton Dial have a stroke and how old was he?
It was in 2009. So that was, he was about 80 years old, right? Somewhere, you know, 79, 80, right?
Okay. And Richard, did you live with your father when you were taking care of him?
No, I didn't. My older brother lived here, and my sister.
Okay.
Right.
That was a question. And then one more question for you is, are there photos of Dial's working studios or photos of how he stored his working materials?
Is there photos of how he stored the materials?
Or of his studios?
I'm sure, you know, there's some photographs around, you know, of the studio and the materials, you know. Normally, you know, and don't get me wrong, I don't think me and Dan was the only contributor to the materials and stuff that he used. It was people that knew of it and knew that he was into, you know, this type of art, and they would bring things by and drop it off, you know. So sometime, you know, it'd be stacks of materials and stuff that he worked with that was there, you know.
And so I wanted to shift the conversation, if we could, to some questions for Jakob. Jakob, could you talk a little bit about you know, your health experience and how did the loss of some of your fine motor skills at a young age influence your choice to make digital art?
Sure. So in 1989, at 12 years old, I had a non-cancerous benign astrocytoma that had been growing since birth, and it was in the cerebellum, which is a center for a lot of involuntary bodily functions, and the tumor was removed, but one of the residual effects was a what's called a partial paresis on my right side. Partial paresis is partial paralysis. Um, so I was right-handed, and before the surgery and then after the surgery, I went to therapy a little bit to work with my right hand, but I had I had broken my right arm the year before, so I had a little practice during that time with my left hand, with writing and drawing with my left hand. So when the surgery came about, and I found out that I had this deficit, um, I stayed with therapy a little bit, but I picked up drawing with my left hand, and um, I found out that I could pretty much draw the same with my left hand, and so I basically have been left-handed since then, left-hand dominant, and what I found over the years after that was just that from I guess about 12 to 19, when I finally switched over to digital, was that just handling material, canvases, and all of that. I was just really clumsy, and the logistics of painting, and I was doing oil painting at the time, so it's, you know, even more logistical challenge to deal with oil paint, especially with residential sinks. You know, turpentine and everything's not really suitable. But also, you know, things like falling into canvases and, you know, breaking things and all that kind of stuff. Really, I found that those things kind of took me away from what I really wanted, which was to get out my ideas quickly. So in '99, I took a trip to Barcelona and saw at the MACBA, the Contemporary Art Museum in Barcelona, I saw the work of William Kentridge, who's a South African. He's a draftsman. He's a drawer, but the end result is animation. End result of his works. And so what I saw in the museum were animated works, and you know, I guess I was maybe 18 or so. You know, I was really excited to see animated work in a museum, which was a new medium for me to see in a museum that I was really excited about. And then I went down the street from Makba to a gallery called Feiran Kano, and they had the intermedia work of Eloy Puig, who is a local Catalan artist that had intermedia work in the museum, which an intermedia is basically a cross. It is digital, print, and analog all mixed into one practice. So when I came back home, I was like really excited by these two exhibits, and really thought that digital art would be the way for me to really get my ideas out quickly without having to worry about physicality and being clumsy and breaking things, storing things. And additionally, what I had been inspired by in oil painting was the so-called old masters and the chiaroscuro method, and or rather the chiaroscuro concept, which is the contrast between light and dark, which pretty much all visual artists are working with that concept to a certain degree. But I was also in painting, when you look at the old masters, Goya or Vermeer, Rembrandt, the technique that they use to achieve the effect of chiaroscuro is called glazing. And so this really, it's a technique of laying down a thick layer of white paint, letting it dry, and then since it's oil, it takes forever to dry. But once it does dry, you come back over with washes of color, and this is how they get the glow to the skin. Say like with Rembrandt, you know, that glow that actually over time gets more intense of a glow when the as the oil cures over the years. And so I wanted to really see what those, think about what those artists would be excited about doing in our age. And I decided that they would really revel in the idea of working directly in a backlit medium. So I yeah, changed over to digital from there.
And then what inspired you to translate, and I think this was recently a recent decision to translate your digital artworks into large scale paintings?
It's a couple of different things. One was just screen time. I am kind of done with screen time. I've been on the computer since 1996. I first got onto the internet at the Florida State Library when I was a freshman. I think the internet just came out publicly that year, and it was introduced to me as a card catalog, basically a digital card catalog. And so yeah, it's been 20 plus years of screen time, and I thought that I was kind of losing my my relationship to space and actual like real materials and touch and tactility. So that was one thing. The other thing was really the NFT space and how that community, I'm excited about the technology itself, and I was excited to see artists, you know, of different genres and different in different areas. So illustrators and designers and fine artists. I was excited to see them to be able to make a living off of their work and to be able to sell. And I would go into chat rooms and hear about all kind of artists with disabilities as well that were really happy about what NFTs allowed them to do, as far as not having to, again, you know, handle material and the same thing I was dealing with when I was younger, and you know, shipping and all of this stuff. They could actually just get their work out into the world and make a living. But along with that, the more negative sides were the scams, or are the scams, and kind of these attitudes that were coming from the community itself that began to, I felt, taint digital art itself. So digital art and NFT art are not the same.
And
digital
Jacob,
art
sorry,
been around.
sorry to interrupt you. Will you just tell us what an NFT is for people who don't know?
Oh, sorry. Yes, NFT is a non-fungible token, and I guess without getting too techie, it is a way for digital artists to be able to create their works and authenticate them. That is, to make them unique. Whereas before, and I certainly dealt with this throughout my whole digital career is that because it's online, you can't really have a unique, one-of-a-kind work because everything is copyable. So NFTs, the non-fungible token, is basically a code that is similar to a digital watermark, which had already existed. So NFTs, and it's not really that new of a technology, but a digital watermark that is marking this image as a unique item, which means that it's now collectible. So yeah, is that sort of suitable as a definition, maybe?
Yes, yes, great. Thank you.
Yeah. So, yeah, I was just really concerned about some of the ethics of the NFT community and how that began to affect digital art. So now, when I say I'm a digital artist, people are going to have in their mind this horrible, scammy experience that you know, yeah, I didn't want to be a part of. But I would say of those two reasons I just gave, really the screen time and missing tactile objects and being in real space is probably more of the reason. I was just missing painting and space. And for me, art is about reconciling ourselves with this reality, both for the artist and the viewer, reconciling ourselves to the natural world. So it was just time, I guess.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And I wanted to, if it's okay, read kind of bringing us back to your connection and your interest in Thornton Dial's work, particularly both pre and following his stroke. But I believe this is the essay or part of an essay that you wrote for the catalog. And it's basically you're noting that there's a difference between the earlier work and his later work, in that there's a softness both in his palette, a single pastel mauve tape, for instance, and his signature found object relief. And then you go on to say, and I think this is beautiful, but this reminds me of the geological wisdom and how younger mountains like the Himalayas have higher, sharper peaks than the more aged mountains, rounded and softened by millions of years of erosion like the Appalachians. But unlike deep time erosion, a stroke is an event that suddenly jars, having both physiological, bodily, and neurological/cognitive implications. And I was just wondering if you could just kind of elaborate a little bit on your thoughts there about his work, pre and post.
Yeah. Thank you for reading that. Yeah, I noticed in the later works, it's there's definitely a softening of the relief, and what we call relief is kind of sculptural forms mixed with the 2D. So things coming off of the canvas. If you see the show at AEIVA, for instance, there are some pieces with just really stark shadows. I mean, the objects are really coming off of the canvas 6, 7, or 8 inches, versus some of the later works where the relief is relatively low, maybe only 2 or 3 inches off of the surface. And so that was the main thing I picked up on from his earlier work to later work, and it's kind of what was behind my question about the working methodologies, and if it was an issue of handling material, or if it was just more of a psychological shift. But in general, Um, Also, like I didn't mention in the essay that I've noticed since is kind of a little bit more respect for space in his compositions. Um, in the later work versus earlier works, where the earlier works seem to be marked by what they call horror vacui, which is the fear of empty spaces. Where in some of the works, like this one that's in screen now, coming in from the background, there's almost like this bustling, like the canvas is not enough. Like he could have gone on to fill in much more.
Jacob,
And
are you showing something right now?
yes, I am.
Okay, we don't see that.
Oh no. Okay. Hmm. I'm not sure why.
Can you press share screen again?
Yeah, that's the problem. Hmm. Okay. Okay. I was kind of froze. Okay. Hmm. Okay, how about now? Does that work?
I do not see it.
Yeah.
No. Okay. Let's see. So entire screen. No.
No, Dana, our
Mhm.
tech guru, is
Okay.
maybe try one more time, and if that doesn't work, then we'll move ahead. But I know it would be
Okay.
nice for us to see what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, so no.
Um, well, I think the only other option is if you emailed it, but we can go
Yeah.
ahead.
Okay. Sorry about that. So yes, in the later works, like I mentioned in the essay, there is a softening of the palette that is not just softening, but a more monochrome versus the early stark, contrasts and between different very bright colors, and yeah, it's just a kind of a softening in terms of energy, in terms of the height of the found objects and all of that. So I wondered if it was, yeah, I wonder how much of an effect or how much of that was attributable to the stroke itself.
Thank you, Jacob. I also, before we turn it back over, I just wanted to also ask you, since the lens that I'm working with is as an artist, but also as an arts and health practitioner. And I know that you have worked in the area of arts and health. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
Oh yeah.
Oh, your screen is.
I see. I'm so elated. Finally. So as I mentioned to you before, before we started this conversation, my mother's a speech pathologist, and so I'd always grown up with therapy and the kind of a therapeutic paradigm, meaning that for most deficits, there is a field of study that can contribute to helping and addressing that deficit, if not, completely healing. So it was interesting to me. I'd been influenced by Joseph Beuys, and who is a German artist who really spoke about. He wrote about what he calls the therapeutic conceptions of art, which is that art in itself is a therapy. And with my own medical history, I thought that it would be interesting to look at art within therapy and art therapy. And so I teamed up with a doctor of art therapy named Anna Masick in New York. And we did a project out in LA called Aesthetics and Therapeutics Lab, which was and is it's a collective that is looking at new forms of how art can address deficits in terms of healing, in different populations that are dealing with different challenges. So out there, using the full dome in a 360-degree view, and if you know, full dome is kind of like the planetarium structure, or Epcot Center at Disney. And when you get inside, what we call a projection dome is like a planetarium, has 3 different projectors that are projecting images in 360. So we had, I think, maybe 5 or 6 modules that were attempting to use the dome space in another way. And planetariums have been done for decades now, and usually, kind of limited subject matter as far as talking about astrophysics and space, but we wanted to use it as an art space, and particularly taking advantage of 360 immersive views where the audience or the viewer or the would-be patient would kind of have to move their bodies around and their necks, and in order to see everything, because it's really immersive, like the sky itself. So one of the modules was something that my mother had mentioned to me as a teenager, which always stuck, which was about joint attention, which is some scientists consider it a center of, or the beginning of human learning, which is joint attention is a triangulation between one observer, the thing that's being observed, and then another observer. So these two observers talking to each other over this the object that they're looking at. And the example that's most given for joint attention is a mother and child looking at a tree or pointing at a sun. Um, that's basically the beginning of human learning. And so when you look at certain learning disabilities or certain conditions or states like a autism, having space like that could be very useful. Um, again, for moving the body around to having attention and focus on one part of a viewer's frame of view. So yeah, and a lot of other modules were just dealing with color and say like color phobias, which are sometimes a thing in autism, where there's certain colors that they literally want to stay away from. And so yeah, it was just kind of introducing the idea of using art, and which is not a new idea. Art therapy has been around, but in this case, we were using the full dome as a new kind of format for playing with space.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I noticed that we now have a photo of Thornton dial on the screen. And so at this point, I would love to bring Richard back into the conversation. We have about 10 minutes left. And so I wanted to, I think some questions came through for Richard. And let's see. So S. Stewart says, you touched on this earlier. Richard, after your father had his stroke, what materials did he gravitate to? Did he prefer painting over assemblage and sculpture work?
Personally, I don't think the sculpture, I don't remember sculpture, like he were engaged in large metal sculptures. And that's something I don't believe that he took part in after the stroke. The painting and, well, the large metal sculptures and with very limited, if at all, their works on paper was something that he just didn't have the motor skills at that particular time to do. So I would think it would just be based on canvas. And so another thing I was talking with Jacob, I guess I left out, when Daddy first got into art, he worked with what he had there at the present time. So I think if Daddy was a lot younger, because you see a lot of his work, just like Jacob was mentioning, it was built out. A lot of it were because he was a lot younger, And the other thing were that it were, times changed, tubes changed, air tubes changed. So attachments got to be something that would, using a nail and a hammer. So, shortly after he moved to the shop, they started using like power tube, which something that didn't come out to, the late 90s or the early 2000s, So a lot of these things I don't think were contributed to, you know, the uh, motor skills that he had. It was just that times were changing, attitudes became more relevant. And so some of these things were changes due because of that. And I do, you know, agree with Jacob, you know, on, you know, the help that he had. Those things, when you add them all up, you know, it could contribute to, you know, the work being a little bit differently, you know. So that's what I would think that, you know, some of you have to kind of add all these things up, you know, age and just having the strength alone. You know, when he first started, I think he was probably in his early 60s, but you know, it was like when he passed, you know, it was like age 97. So the whole world had started kind of changing at that time. So he just kind of leaned into the things that he had to work with. Yeah, 87.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more. It's kind of a two-part question that we have, and then I want to leave it with any last words or thoughts that both you, Richard, and Jacob have. But I'll just kind of turn this into a two-parter. This is for Richard. Did he think of himself as a folk or visionary artist in his early years? Did he always feel he was a fine artist?
I don't think he really, you know, tried to put himself in either category. You know, he was just creating what, you know, the work that he could, you know, his mind kind of brought him to create. You know, and I think he kind of left all that, the rest of, you know, a lot of times they say it was a folk artist or whatever, but he just created, you know, and he just let the people determine, you know, what category they want to put it in.
Okay. And so in just our last few minutes, I wanted to just turn it back to both of you and see if you had any kind of last thoughts to share. I'll start with Jacob.
Yeah, no, I wanted to respond to the to what Richard was saying about the technology changing, because that's definitely something that's been very close to me and has changed the way that I worked. And I definitely see that, you know, as far as having to really consider all of these things, as far as, like you said, the age, the technology, the mood, the times, and the physiological deficits altogether. You know, which is why I think that you know, so much more of a greater analysis is needed. You know, when we're talking about you know, visual artists, but really any artist, and beyond artist, any of us have such complex stories, you know, as far, and influences as far as why we come to make any one particular decision. My pieces that are at Mouse Contemporary, which is a third installation to the shows that are at AEIVA and Sanford right now, that I'm also in with Richard. Those pieces are called analysand, which is a word out of psychoanalysis, but in my lexicon, or in my language, I'm using it as a term to point to anything that can be analyzed, not just patients or people. And that's kind of what the title is pointing towards, is that so much of more of a greater analysis is needed than we actually give ourselves. And again, we're not just talking about artists, we're talking about literally each one of us has such a complex and thousands of hours long story that, you know, should be considered, and would be nice to consider if we would, you know, slow down and kind of think about one another and one another's lives more. So yeah.
Thank you. And Jacob, where can we find out more about your work and your projects?
It's a good question. I'm working on a site right now, which seems like I'm always working on a site. But there is a catalog for a museum show that I had at the Seattle Art Museum. Came out in 2015, and I talk a little bit more about my practice there. But the site that I'm working on is jacobdwight.art, and that's going to be coming up later on this this month.
Okay.
There's nothing there right now, so but yeah, I haven't been very good about getting out the stuff, collecting information and artist statements and everything, but yeah.
Well, thank you, because I know people will want to find out more. And then I'll also say for Samantha posted in the chat where you can actually take an online virtual tour of the Thornton Dial exhibit. And so now, Richard, I just wanted to share, have you share some last thoughts with us before we close down?
Well, you know, I just was just thinking, you know, about the event that the show here, and I really want to thank all of you all for participation. But Jacob, you know, is, you know, one thing that event like this, it brings people together, because I heard mention of your name, but from this point, you know, I'll definitely try to keep a track of your work, and the thing that you to overcome, you know, a setback like you did. It just shows that, you know, once a person, you know, find that spot, the purpose for them, you know, being, and regardless of what is art or regardless of what you do, but you feel that call to do the work that I believe that you was here to do, and the struggle that you went through. It just it's amazing, you know. But I noticed that you kept going, and seemed to be me that you made a decent career out of, you know, what your intentions were, you know. So you might have had to make a few changes or adjustments, which all of us do, you know, one time or another, whether it's age or stroke or, you know, some other physical disability. But the thing that inspired me the most, that, you know, you just kept searching and kept at it, and you know, kind of reminds me a lot of my dad, you know. So from this point, I'll definitely keep up with you and try to stay in contact with you. So great, man. And anytime you want to give me a call, you know, feel free to do that.
Definitely. Cool. I'd love to talk to you more. So,
Yes, sir.
all right.
Appreciate you. Yes, sir.
You too.
Right.
Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us for this really wonderful conversation. And also, I want to remind people to look up Richard's work. He's an amazing artist as well. So, Richard Dial. And so I want to thank everyone for being here. Look forward to seeing you in the future. And Jacob and Richard, it was an honor and a delight to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Right. Pleasure.